It brings me a great deal of pleasure today to bring together Karl Rauscher and Richard Zhou, representing Zhou Yonglin from the Deputy Secretary of the General Internet Society of China. First of all, I'd like to introduce Karl Frederick Rauscher.
I want to thank Michael and Jerry and the rest of the leadership of MAAWG for this invitation to be with you here today. Been looking forward to this for quite some time, and we think it's a very exciting opportunity for what we'll be talking about in the next hour. I came yesterday and got a chance to talk to a number of you and listen to what you're doing, and like many technical communities, there's a lot of passionate people here, and a lot of people who are just not thought of by the public at large. Like this study I did recently for the undersea cable infrastructure. I mean, the whole internet, the global economy wouldn't exist without these, for all practical purposes, invisible systems and infrastructure. And I was reflecting this morning to think that a lot of the internet functions probably would be not even usable if it wasn't for the talent that's in this room and others who do similar work. I mean, if this spam was getting through to all the users, I mean, these messaging services would be useless. On behalf of all the people, if I can, be so bold, thank you for all the hard work you do and the important role you play for society. And was very, very much encouraged by the intensity I saw and the passion in the discussions yesterday. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the EastWest Institute. I spent 25 years at Bell Labs. I'm a Bell Labs fellow for the rest of my life, but I made a bold move. I joined a not-for-profit institute that is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, and encourage you to learn a little bit more about it on your free time, but it's basically known as a think and do tank. And what its expertise is dealing with the most difficult problems. There are the most difficult ones, like nuclear proliferation, human trafficking, terrorism, water security, a lot of things you may never hear about in the public domain, but being worked quietly at channels with decision makers around the world and often very dangerous places. So the Institute strategically convenes trusted parties, reframes issues, and mobilizes resources to have an impact. Many organizations have very competent and intelligent people who talk about issues. We don't just talk about the ball, but we try to get the ball moved down the field. Let me tell you a little bit more about the Cybersecurity Initiative. The things we're focusing on in the long term are to introduce new paradigms for private-public partnership, where we intentionally put the private first in front of the public. We italicize it, so if you see that, we're emphasizing PPP with the private sector up front, like the kind of things we see being role modeled here, where we realize because the expertise and the ownership and the knowledge of these technical areas are so much in the private sector, we need to feel free to take the initial steps when we see something that needs to be done. Improving the relationships amongst the top five, the biggest five superpowers in cyberspace. Being prepared for a worldwide massive crisis, beyond the scale of what ASSERT could handle. And seeing rules of the road established for cyber conflict, like they have been established for other domains, land and sea and air and such. The mechanisms that we use at the foundation, first of all, are track 2 bilaterals. Track 1 would be official channels, government to government. So we have track 2 bilaterals, in which we advise stakeholders in their respective governments. We have multilateral private consultations. We've also created a Cyber 40 at the Institute, where we've taken the G20 and added to that the next 20 most critical nation states for cybersecurity. As you see here, there's a lot of subject matter in cybersecurity, very broadly defined. When you're dealing with this number of countries, the definition is very broad. It deals with everything from social issues like protecting youth as they're online, all the way up to the rules of cyber warfare and everything in between, critical infrastructure protection and such. The first deliverable in this area, as an example, was made just under 3 weeks ago, where I worked together with a colleague in Moscow for about half a year, and we worked together with experts from the United States and Russia on taking the Geneva and Hague Conventions, those principles, and putting them in cyberspace. This report was presented at the Munich Security Conference, which is almost 50 years old. It is the largest gathering of traditional security leaders in the world, this annual event. The attendees are presidents, prime ministers, chancellors. Just as the Munich Security Conference was the ideal event to introduce this work, this MAAWG 21st Conference is the ideal event for us to announce our next report. The report is not available today. It will be available shortly next month. But at this point, I'd like to introduce to you our next major bilateral report. And that is one on China-U.S. cooperation on fighting spam. Let me introduce, with some summary statistics, what this study looks like. It's taken place for over a period of a year. It includes the two major cyber superpowers cooperating. There's been 30 subject matter experts combined from both sides, about equally distributed. They represent the major ISPs and other companies and organizations and expertise. Most of the people on the U.S. team have had national security responsibilities in some sense in either government or the private sector. Several of your companies are represented in this team. Likewise, for the Chinese companies, we're not mentioning their names today, but they represent the major players in the industry in China. We've captured 30 facets of deeper understanding. That means the Americans understanding China in new ways in terms of their challenge and how they're battling spam, and likewise the Chinese understanding the American situation better. And they'll be, Richard and I will be sharing a little bit more about that later. We've also, right now, on the order of about 40 consensus best practices. Many of you will be familiar with this type of guidance, but the idea of China and the U.S. agreeing on these voluntary measures is significant. We did a very detailed analysis of looking at possible parameters that could be adjusted, and the decision points there were over 500. So, for example, if you would consider a parameter that could be moved in some way that was analyzed, it was very helpful to understand without making an assumption about, for each country, how they would consider a view. Like, one possible idea is you could tax every email message. It's a way you can move a parameter, not considered a good idea on our side or their side, but it was an example of the rigor we went through our discussions. We considered all ideas, not just the ones we assumed up front might be good ideas, in order to gain a deeper understanding and also systematically walk through the available parameters in this environment. And as you well know, there's hundreds of billions of spam messages filtered every day. There are three objectives of the bilateral. The first two were essential for the Chinese in this dialogue. The third was essential for the Institute to also demonstrate the value of this. So the first one is to have genuine dialogue between the two countries. One may be wondering, why start on spam? Of all the things we could talk about, I mean, we started with the Geneva Conventions with the Russians. Why do we start with spam, of all the topics, with the Chinese? And one of the reasons is because, as everyone in this room is well aware, there is such a level of distrust between both of our countries that we needed to take a basic step on something where there's a lot of common interest. And so the title of the talk, Fighting Spam to Build Trust, is at the core of why this decision was made. While this is maybe a basic step, it's very important we take this first step. There's a great distrust, yet at the same time there is profound interdependence economically and otherwise, even technologically, between our two countries. And we want to make sure we could have not a naive, but a very deliberate and conscious discussion in whatever ways we can. So spam is the first step of additional steps with increasing significance in terms of the subject matter. Second step is to develop that deeper understanding so that we really understand each other better. And so there are things we'll be pointing out in the report that say, we didn't know this before. These are things that are significant in understanding the spam issue for their country. And the third point is to actually agree on some guidance of what will actually reduce spam. And we really appreciate the contributions of some of you here, some of you who have colleagues in your companies that are supporting this activity. because you know how important the subject is and how important it is for these countries to be working together. It is the stated policies of both countries that there be bilateral cooperation and sharing of practices to improve the safety, the stability, the reliability of the internet. And I make reference to last year's Internet in China white paper put out by the State Council Information Office in June, and also to a document that came out a year earlier from the White House, our cyberspace policy review. And those are part 6 and point 7, respectively, in those documents. And so this, in a sense, is partial fulfillment of that vision and directive given that there needs to be better cooperation internationally. I won't go into this in detail, but there was a very carefully designed, systematic process. This is a breakthrough in terms of the relationship between the two countries. And the process basically had the two countries coming together as one team. So unlike the Olympics, where the Chinese and American athletes would compete against each other, in this bilateral relationship, we're on the same team, and we're competing against the problem. And so we had experts on both sides working together, thinking through systematically and rigorously what are the best guidance and ways to improve the spam situation in our countries and our relationship and around the world. The process included consensus at 3 steps: defining the problem, also agreeing on which of the possible parameter adjustments that could be made would be the preferred ones, and then finally on the guidance that would be given. Step 8 of the 8-step process is doing outreach. And as I mentioned before, even though our report is not done after talking to Michael, really couldn't see missing this opportunity to speak to you at this time. So we are making an announcement about the report coming soon, but without the report being available yet today. So we're overlapping step 7 and 8 a little bit here. At this time, I'd like to ask my colleague on this team, Richard Zhao, to join us. And again, in his introduction, he basically was introduced as Chief Strategy Officer of NS Focus. This company has as its clients the largest bank and the largest instant messaging company in the world. And he's also the founder and a board director of the Greater China Region Cloud Security Alliance. So he's someone who understands about starting organizations, dealing with nonprofits, getting people to come together and do consensus. And Richard's going to share some of the deeper understanding and some of the examples of best practices that we've developed during this time. Richard?
Firstly, I appreciate Mary and Jerry and Mike to invite me to be here to be with you. This is a great opportunity for me to present on behalf of Yonglin, on behalf of the China expert team of this initiative. As a member of the team, honestly speaking, I believe that's a very bold initiative championed by EWI. As Karl has mentioned, there are somewhat untrustworthy relationship and some gap between U.S. and China. We believe there should be a lot of challenges and difficulties to meet the common objective of the both team. But finally, that's a pleasure to say the whole team very quickly reached agreement on the methodology, as Karl has mentioned and introduced, and on the common objective, and finally move ahead. I hope to share a little bit about the deeper understanding, as Karl had mentioned. That's a deeper understanding by the team a little bit. Firstly, the team observed there might be closer collaboration between the public and the private sector at China, hosted by the Internet Society of China. That I don't know what's the counterpart at the U.S. That's an organization that can release some policy and organize the industry level activities. There is a technical platform for the industry at China to work together to meet regularly. That means there might be a more efficient or effective way for the industry to respond to the cyber threats and spamming. For example, once a tool or technology or approach turn out to be effective by one carrier or one service provider, it can be convened and discussed at a meeting organized by the ISA, and it can be deployed as a common practice in the whole industry. So by this approach, this improved the responsiveness and the efficiency of the anti-spam activity at China. So that might be the part of the reason why China, as the biggest internet user community in the world, has dropped out of the top 10 at the most of the industry statistics rank, including software and semantic. So another reason might be the loopback feedback loops implemented at China between the public user and the provider. There are some freewares and the best practice promoted nationwide to let the user very conveniently to send their complaint to the carrier and to the operator. But as for that's inside China, but as for the international feedback loop, there's a person I think that might be the weak link of the whole chain. So that's my second deeper understanding I want to share. The second one, I think that for the international collaboration, that might be not adequate, considering the potential, the gap at the culture, language, including the politics. As a practitioner at China, we might think the way those U.S.-based third-party organizations on anti-spam might be a little bit rude or biased way to treat the IP address from China. So as introduced by Mike, I worked for China Telecom 12 years ago as the chief of the security affairs. So managing the spam is part of my job. So I found that at the early morning, that someday when this line was cut off by AT&T, just without any notification. But from the China practitioner perspective, that might be a little bit rude. That might be from our counterpart at the U.S. They just cannot get a response from China. They might so that's have to do control. So the second observation, the deeper understanding then shared, we need to improve the international, the bilateral collaboration between U.S. and China. It will benefit the two countries. It won't be the win-lose. It should be the win and win. So that's 2 points of the deeper understanding I want to share inside this meeting. I appreciate this opportunity Mark gave me. Hopefully in the near future, Mark can have this great event at Asia Pacific so that will be closer communication between these two countries. Thank you very much. Give it all the time to Karl.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Richard made a mention that China has not been in the top 10 statistics-wise, and I think with the expertise in this room, many of you probably know that, but I did attend the one special session held yesterday on spam statistics, and it was shared there that I guess in your own statistics, you don't see China in the top 10, and so that was it was a surprise. It was one of those big understandings that the American team had when they began to look at what's happening in China, that they're not in the top 10, and yet they have this dramatic growth of internet users and computers and their networks at the same time. And some of the understandings might be related to language, might be related to some controls. Network, we understand that, but the end result was not something that we were aware of in those statistics until we began the study. I understand that this organization has very strong technical expertise, and yet is dealing with countermeasures that need to be implemented that are policy. I made that as a background to make this point for this organization, that the technology continues to move very, very fast. Even the best of us that are mastering technology in mobile phones or with our computers, whatever, it's moving fast for any of us, yet alone the typical consumer. So what I mean, software and hardware, all those things are moving very fast. Relative to that, the policy is really eating dust. It's really staying far behind. We just need to deliberately, we all kind of sense this, but we need to just consciously recognize that, and therefore it needs more aggressive attention. It's one of the reasons I think I can have bigger impact in my life working in the not-for-profit institute, focusing on international policy than I was able to as an engineer in other areas. And one of the things I encourage IEEE, as I would encourage this organization, is that it's not for everybody. But for those of you who got a good grasp of the technological issues, which I'm sure many of you hear, and have that interest to be involved in influencing public policy, messages, you're needed. We need people. We have too many people who have a third or fourth or fifth-hand understanding of these issues, at the policy table. We need to have engineers. We need to have people who understand these issues at the policy table and learn to be effective in influencing what the policies are going to be. So I applaud what I see being done here, and I thank you again very much for this opportunity, and would appreciate any input you have on what we're doing and your advice. So thank you again very much, Jerry and Michael. Thank you. Yeah, we'll take a few.